Nowhere to hide until this police canine dog turned the tide. When a relentless killer with deep connections inside the force sets his sights on a determined police officer, the truth teeters on the edge of being buried forever. With no allies left and danger closing in, the officer's only hope lies in his highly trained canine partner, who senses what the human eye cannot. A deadly ambush in an underground hideout pushes them to the brink until the canine dog makes an unthinkable move that changes everything. But as the case unravels, one question remains. Is the true mastermind still out there, watching their every step? The air carried a dry, metallic scent as Onyx's paws pressed into the brittle grass of the abandoned lot. His handler, Detective Damien Scott, had run this route a dozen times before, yet something felt off. Onyx's posture shifted, muscles tense, tail rigid. His nose dropped low, sniffing with sharp, deliberate movements. "Find something?" Damien asked, though he already knew the answer. Onyx's response came quick, a deep, guttural bark. Not the kind that signaled a casual alert, but something urgent. Damien's grip on the leash tightened as the canine started pawing at the dirt. "Get a team here," Damien called into his radio. "We're digging." Within minutes, floodlights cast stark shadows across the lot, illuminating the excavation site. Shovels hit soil, and the scent that followed was unmistakable. Decay, long past its time. A muffled curse came from one of the forensic techs as something brittle cracked under a careful touch. The grave had been hidden well, but nothing stayed buried forever. What they pulled from the earth wasn't just a body. The bones bore markings, carved deep and deliberate. Lines twisted and curled over ribs, spiraled across the femur, slashed jagged patterns along the skull. "Ritualistic," one of the forensic analysts muttered, snapping photos. "But nothing recent. This body's been here for years." Damien stood silent, eyes locked on the remains. The carved symbols weren't random. They meant something. Within hours, the official report was filed, an old homicide, brutal but singular. No signs pointing to a repeat crime. The department was ready to close the file before it even opened. Damien wasn't. Long after the site had been cleared, he sat in his office, scrolling through pages of missing persons reports. He searched for patterns, connections, anything that would explain why someone had been buried that way. By the time he shut the file, exhaustion clung to his thoughts. The city outside was quiet, streetlights casting dim pools of yellow over pavement. Then Onyx growled. Not a soft, restless noise. This was deep, warning, directed toward the window. Damien's hand hovered over his desk drawer, where his service weapon rested. He didn't move to grab it yet, just listened. The house was silent. Onyx stood at the door now, ears high, muscles stiff. Someone was out there. Damien remained still, listening to the silence that stretched through the apartment. Onyx didn't budge from his place near the door, his body tense, his ears pointed toward whatever had caught his attention outside. Damien moved carefully, stepping around the coffee table without making a sound. The moment he reached for the curtain, Onyx let out a low growl, not loud, but full of warning. The street below looked empty. No movement, no unusual cars parked along the curb. Yet, the weight of being watched lingered. He stayed there a moment longer before stepping back. Whatever or whoever had been out there was gone. He barely slept that night. His mind was already pulling at the thread he'd found in the missing persons reports. The body they'd uncovered wasn't a one-time killing. There was a pattern. By morning, Damien sat at his desk, the glow of the computer screen reflecting off his badge. Files were stacked beside him, years of missing persons cases, all unsolved. And then he saw it. Every 3 years, a victim, always buried in an abandoned location. The earliest case he found was from 14 years ago. The locations varied: an old railway yard, a shuttered factory, a construction site halted by bankruptcy. Different places, different years, but the spacing between them was precise. A pattern. He was still processing the information when the call came in. Another burial site had been found, this time at the edge of a collapsed warehouse lot on the west side of town. The air smelled of damp soil and something faintly metallic as Damien approached. A forensic officer waved him over, his face tight with something close to unease. "This one's fresh," the man muttered. The tarp peeled back, revealing the body of a woman. Unlike the last, decomposition had barely set in. Damien felt his stomach tighten as he recognized the name on the missing persons report. Natalie Fisher. Reported missing just weeks ago. The cycle hadn't ended. The killer was still active. The realization barely had time to settle before Captain Thomas Grayson showed up, his expression hard. "Scott," he called, motioning Damien over. The captain wasted no time. "This case is out of our jurisdiction. Step back." Damien frowned. "How?" "It's an active homicide, and—" I said step back. Grayson's voice carried the kind of finality that left no room for argument. But Damien wasn't going to let this go. Later that evening, he sat at his desk, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. His fingers tapped against the arm of his chair, his eyes flicking toward Onyx, who had been restless since they left the site. The dog circled near the door, then sat, staring toward it like he was waiting for something. It wasn't over. Damien could feel it in his bones. That night, someone broke into his apartment. No shattered glass. No forced entry. Nothing missing. Just a single note left on his kitchen table. "Let sleeping dogs lie." The next morning, Damien made a call. Dr. Caroline Monroe had been a profiler before she retired. She'd studied killers most officers couldn't wrap their heads around: methodical, patient, detached. If anyone could make sense of the markings on the bones, it was her. He met her in a small office lined with bookshelves. She had silver-streaked hair pulled back into a loose knot and a sharp gaze that didn't miss much. "These carvings," she murmured, running a gloved finger over the photograph of the remains. "They're precise. Not just for show." "What do they mean?" She leaned back, her brow furrowing. "Whoever did this isn't careless. They follow structure, order. The patterns resemble markings seen in certain military circles, coded messages, specific signals. This isn't random violence. It's intentional." Damien's grip on the file in his hands tightened. A killer with tactical training. That changed everything. He needed more information, more eyes on this case, someone who had seen something. That's how he found Lenny Scraps Morgan. Lenny had been living on the streets for years, but he wasn't blind to what happened in the quiet corners of the city. Damien found him huddled in the back alley of a rundown convenience store, the scent of cigarette smoke thick in the air. "I don't know nothing," Lenny muttered before Damien even spoke. "You saw him," Damien said, keeping his voice even. "The one dumping the body." Lenny's jaw tightened. His hands fidgeted against his coat, pulling it tighter around himself. "You're messing with something you don't understand, man. I need to know." Lenny exhaled through his nose, rubbing at his face before glancing around the alley. He leaned in just slightly. "He wore a uniform," he whispered. "Not a street thug. Not some random guy. He moved like someone who knew how to disappear." Damien felt his breath hitch. "What kind of uniform?" Lenny hesitated. "Didn't see a badge, but I know a cop when I see one." Damien's stomach turned. Before he could press further, Lenny backed away. "I shouldn't have said anything. I didn't see nothing." Damien reached for him, but Lenny shook his head. "You don't get it, detective. Some graves ain't meant to be dug up." The next morning, Lenny was dead. His body was found near an alley behind an old diner. His hands had been severed. Pinned to his chest was another note. "You can't dig up what's already buried." The message was clear. Someone was watching, and they weren't just covering their tracks. They were sending a warning. Damien looked down at the blood-stained pavement, his mind racing through the details. This wasn't an outsider. This was someone with access. Someone who knew the system. Someone inside the department. Damien clenched his jaw as he stared at the blood-stained pavement where Lenny had been left like a discarded warning. The message wasn't subtle, it was precise, deliberate. Whoever was behind this had control, and they wanted him to know it. Onyx let out a low huff beside him, his posture tense. Even he could sense it. By the time Damien returned to the precinct, his mind was already moving through the list of names. Someone here wasn't just covering for the killer, they were involved. And Onyx, trained to recognize threats, was starting to react around certain officers. Especially Jared Colton. Colton had always dismissed the case too quickly, brushing it off as unimportant. The moment the second burial site was uncovered, he was one of the first to suggest dropping it. Now, every time Onyx was near him, the dog's reaction was the same, ears pinned back, body rigid, a quiet growl building deep in his throat. Damien had seen the reaction before. It meant Onyx smelled something, fear, deception, or worse. That night, Damien pulled up precinct security footage from the past decade. It took hours, sifting through file after file, until something caught his attention. Colton. He wasn't just some bystander in this case. He had been present near multiple victims before they vanished, outside their workplaces, near their homes, even showing up in locations where their bodies were later found. Damien didn't wait. He needed to see for himself. He tailed Colton after shift change, keeping a safe distance. The officer drove with purpose, not even checking his mirrors. That alone told Damien something. He wasn't expecting to be followed. The car finally pulled into the lot of an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. A single floodlight flickered near the entrance. Colton stepped out of his car, and within seconds, a second figure emerged from the shadows. The hooded man exchanged something with him, a small object, barely visible from Damien's vantage point. Onyx let out a low growl beside him. Something wasn't right. Damien moved carefully, closing the distance. But the moment his boot hit the gravel near the entrance, something shifted under his foot. A wire. The explosion came fast. Heat erupted through the air as a firebomb ignited, sending flames bursting outward. Damien grabbed Onyx and threw himself behind a concrete pillar just in time. The blast shook the rusted metal walls, sending shrapnel flying. Colton took off, sprinting toward his car. Damien recovered fast, running after him as he pulled his gun. "Stop!" Colton didn't listen. Tires screeched as he swung the car onto the main road, pushing the speed limit. Damien jumped into his own vehicle, Onyx climbing into the passenger seat as he floored it. The chase tore through the industrial district, streetlights flashing in quick bursts as the gap closed between them. Colton's car swerved, barely missing a truck crossing the intersection. And then his luck ran out. A second truck barreled down the road from the opposite direction. Colton had no time to react. The impact was violent. His car crumpled, flipping twice before slamming into a street lamp. By the time Damien reached the wreck, it was clear Colton wasn't going to talk. What he left behind, however, spoke volumes. Inside his locker at the precinct, hidden beneath a stack of old case files, Damien found a flash drive. He plugged it into his laptop, stomach tightening as the screen filled with footage. The victims. Tied, gagged, moments before their deaths. But one thing stood out. Colton wasn't the one giving the orders. He was just a pawn. The real mastermind was still out there. Damien ran a forensic analysis on the flash drive, tracking the metadata. The files had been stored in one location before they were transferred to a decommissioned military research site on the outskirts of the city. That's where the trail led. Damien geared up, loading his weapon and securing Onyx's vest before heading out. The entrance to the storage facility was barely marked, just an old service tunnel leading underground. As they moved deeper, the air turned dense, carrying a metallic tang that clung to everything. Then Onyx halted. His ears flattened, his body low. Something was down there. Damien moved cautiously, sweeping his flashlight along the walls. That's when he saw it, a hidden chamber. The walls were stained dark, dried blood caked into the concrete. Chains hung from the ceiling, rusted but still strong. Tables lined the back wall, surgical tools still laid out, clean and organized. This wasn't just a dump site. It was a killing floor. On a nearby desk, stacks of old files were left open, detailed notes on each victim, observations, records. But something stood out. Each victim had a connection to law enforcement. They weren't just random targets. They had all interacted with the police before they disappeared. Damien reached for his phone, dialing Dr. Monroe. She picked up on the second ring. "I found something," he said. "It's worse than we thought." But before she could respond, the line went dead. A distorted voice replaced hers. "You were never supposed to find this." The lights cut out. Footsteps echoed from deeper in the tunnel. The real killer was there with them. The lights remained off. Damien stayed still, his grip firm around his weapon. Onyx shifted beside him, silent but alert. The steps in the darkness weren't rushed. Whoever was there had no reason to hurry. Then came the voice. Steady. Cold. "You should have let this go, Damien." The words settled in the air, and then a faint glow flickered to life. A flashlight clicked on, casting a dull beam over the floor. Stepping forward, Captain Thomas Grayson emerged from the shadows, his face unreadable. Damien didn't lower his gun. "You are behind this." Grayson exhaled slowly, tilting his head. "What do you think you've uncovered?" A killer with a taste for the theatrical. A rogue cop covering his tracks? His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're barely scratching the surface." Damien didn't speak. He let the silence pull the truth out. "You think this is about some ritualistic murders?" Grayson continued, stepping closer. "No, this is about control. About keeping order." His tone remained calm, measured, like a teacher explaining something to a stubborn student. Damien didn't move. "You are executing them." Grayson gave a slight nod. "Runaways. Whistleblowers. People no one would miss. People who became problems." He gestured to the blood-stained walls around them. "This didn't start with me, Scott. It started long before you ever wore that badge." Damien tightened his grip on the gun. "Colton took orders from you." "He was useful," Grayson admitted. "But replaceable." He took another slow step forward. "You think this is about me? About one corrupt officer? This goes deeper than you realize. A program was buried here decades ago. Black ops, human experiments, things you wouldn't believe if I told you." Onyx let out a low growl. The sound filled the hollow space between them. Grayson barely reacted. "You can't stop this. You can't even begin to understand it." Damien's gaze flickered past him. Movement. Shadows shifting. He wasn't alone. Armed men stepped from the darkness, their weapons drawn. They weren't officers. They weren't standard muscle either. They moved with the precision of trained soldiers. Grayson sighed. "I don't want to kill you, Damien." Onyx tensed. Damien didn't wait. The dog lunged. The attack was brutal, fast. Onyx's jaws locked around Grayson's throat, forcing him back as he let out a strangled yell. The moment of chaos was all Damien needed. He fired 2 shots, clean and direct. The first man dropped. The second hesitated just long enough for Damien to drive his elbow into his jaw, knocking him back. Gunfire erupted. Damien dove for cover as bullets tore through the concrete walls. Onyx held his ground despite a graze to his side. He let go of Grayson just as the captain shoved him away, blood trailing from his torn neck. Grayson stumbled, clutching his throat. He bolted toward the tunnels, trying to escape. Damien gave chase. The tunnel twisted, narrowing into a dead-end passage lined with rusted pipes. Grayson reached the end, breathing hard, pressing a hand against his wound. "Give it up," Damien called, raising his gun. Grayson let out a rough laugh. "You don't understand. Taking me down won't change anything. You think this dies with me?" Damien didn't respond. Behind him, boots pounded against the ground. "Back up." The precinct had finally caught up. Officers swarmed the tunnel, weapons raised. Grayson's smirk faded. He straightened, rolling his shoulders back as if trying to regain a fraction of his lost power. Damien watched as the officers took him down, wrenching his arms behind his back. Even bleeding, even beaten, Grayson didn't flinch. As they dragged him past, he gave one final warning. "You'll never stop it." But Damien wasn't listening anymore. His focus was on Onyx, who stood firm despite his injury. The dog met his gaze, steady and unbroken. The case was over.